So thank you all for coming here this morning. My name is Dr. Amanda Clacy. I'm a research fellow here at the Sunshine Coast Mind and Neuroscience Thompson Institute, and it's absolutely my pleasure to be sharing with you this morning a bit more about our suicide prevention program. But before we get into that, I thought I might tell you a little bit more about this building and what the Thompson Institute is about. We're a little bit different in that we have a care model. We operate on a different set of principles to a lot of different research institutes. The first thing that we're doing here is clinical services. We have our clinical masters and masters of professional practice psychology students who are in training, and they're supervised by some really great clinical psychologists themselves. And with that, we're actually making sure that we're building in evidence to our clinical practices, so they're actually getting the cutting edge of psychology training. We're also big advocates for mental health, and that takes a couple of different shapes and forms. There's obviously through translational research, where all of our researchers and all of our clinicians here are very big on translational research, which basically just means that we don't do research for the sake of it. We do research that's actually going to help people, and to be able to help people, we have to communicate that outwardly and widely. Research is obviously a big part of what we do here. We do everything from psychologically based research studies to clinically based research studies, and even clinical trials as well. We are world leading in our research areas. Our themes are suicide prevention, obviously, youth mental health, ageing and dementia, and we've also got some cutting edge neuroimaging technology downstairs as well, which we're integrating into a lot of broad different themes as well. The E in our care model is education. So that ties in with our clinical master's students and our masters of professional practice, but also in supervising honours students and taking on work placement students and going out to high schools around the area and teaching them a bit about what we're doing here and the importance of evidence-based practice and the importance of asking difficult questions and finding those answers to them. Education is actually one of my favourite parts of my job. I really love passing on the passion for mental health research and pulling in that advocacy as well. I think together there's a lot more that we can be doing in mental health, and it's really great to be teaching that to young minds or malleable minds that really believe it and want to take it with two hands and do something about it too. That passing on the passion is something that we're really passionate about at the Thompson Institute. So today the focus is on our suicide prevention program. Obviously talking about suicide is a bit of a heavy topic. In Australia, the stats on suicide are pretty devastating. So these statistics were released by the Australian Bureau of Statistics last year. And 3 out of 4 deaths were found to be in men. So 3 out of 4 suicides are in men. On average, there are 9 suicides per day in Australia. And that is a statistic that still breaks my heart absolutely every time that it pops into my consciousness. Suicide attempts and ideation are big issues. So even though we've got a really high rate of suicide, we've got an even higher rate of suicidal ideation and behaviours. Those numbers are really difficult to calculate for obvious reasons, but the numbers we do have show that it's about 65,000 people will attempt suicide each year in Australia. The ripple effect of suicide is something that is really a big part of this conversation. For every death by suicide, between 100 and 120 people will feel the direct impact of that loss. So that means not only do we need to be looking at suicide prevention strategies for people who are suffering with suicidal ideation, but also for the people who are bereaved by suicide and feeling that impact of that loss. On the Sunshine Coast, unfortunately, our statistics aren't much better. In fact, they're a little bit worse, but they follow a lot of the same trends. So approximately 1 person per week on the coast dies by suicide, which is, again, a crazy statistic. There are a lot of people accessing mental health support though. So nearly 13,000 people between 2016 and 2017 accessed mental health services. What we're starting to understand too is that there's some very common risk factors or some very common red flags to suicidality. 86% of our deaths by suicide on the coast had a comorbidity of depression, anxiety, or stress or substance use disorders. Although this is a bit of a heavy statistic, it's a good statistic in that we can actually start to develop strategies, prevention strategies for these risk factors. So we're not trying to just rely on crisis care when we're talking about suicide prevention. One of the big things that we're doing here is really focusing on that upstream prevention. How can we stop suicide from being even an option by taking care of these things upstream? Our highest risk group is actually our 40 to 60-year-old males on the Sunshine Coast, and it is a high stat that's been held for 10 years by that demographic. That's something that a lot of our schools actually find a little bit shocking because there's so much conversation around suicide in the youth, but really our conversation does need to include our 40 to 60-year-old males. So our suicide prevention program is a big one. We are trying to take on a lot of different things because suicide is a very complex issue. So it's not something that can be addressed with just one idea. So we're taking a 3-pillared approach to our suicide prevention program. Firstly, we have the Alliance for Suicide Prevention, which I'm hoping most of you have probably heard a little bit about, but I will go into detail of that in a minute. We're also developing a digital tool. Everything's online these days, so how can we harness technology to support suicide prevention activities? And our clinical trials as well. So we're not at the Thompson Institute trying to stand up and tell people how to do their jobs. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel. What we are trying to do is develop an integrated network of service providers, organisations and groups who are walking together in the same direction. There are an abundance of different groups that are working in the suicide prevention space, but what we want to see in the Alliance is that we're all moving together with the same kind of evidence-based practice towards that same outcome, because everybody wants to see those suicide rates drop, if not disappear. Even though it's just me up here talking to you this morning, it's not just little old me that's doing all of this work. We have quite an extensive team. We've got Elise Yoni, our project manager, which I'm sure a lot of you have probably received some emails from. But we've also got a psychiatrist on staff. We've got mental health nurse practitioners, and we've even got a molecular biologist as well. We're a very multi-dimensional team. We've come from a lot of different backgrounds. But that's again because suicide is a complex issue and it doesn't take one background to answer this problem. So our Alliance model is actually an evidence-based model. It's considered world's best practice and it's based on the European Alliance Against Depression. The EAAD framework was trialled throughout Europe in 50 or so different countries and was shown to reduce the suicidal behaviours by about 24% in a 2-year period. We're one of 2 trial sites in Australia. The other trial site's over in Western Australia, and they're about 6 months in front of us. And they're actually showing us how incredibly impactful this particular model can be in an Australian context, which is one of the biggest criticisms that people seem to have about the Alliance model, is that it was built for Europeans, it doesn't belong here. But this model is a very flexible model in that its success depends on our ability to tailor it to the needs of the community. So if we can understand the community's needs, we can tailor this model to those needs. So there's no reason that this can't be an Australian model, and we're actually seeing that over in Western Australia, and we're starting to see it here as well. So there's 4 pillars to this model. Yes, 3-pronged approach, 4 pillars, lots of things we're looking at. The 4 pillars of this model is upskilling medical professionals. So our GPs are quite great at diagnosing a broken arm, but when it comes to identifying mental health concerns and working with people to develop mental health plans, they're actually admitting that they're not doing so well. So we're working with our GPs and our mental health, our frontline medical practitioners to upskill them in these necessary skills. Gatekeeper training is another focus that we're working on. I love gatekeeper training. Gatekeepers are essentially anybody in the community who can stand up and help somebody who's struggling access support. It's a really empowering pillar to work in because mental health is everybody's responsibility and people just need the skills to be able to action that. And that's what Gatekeeper training is all about. Our public awareness and education campaign is a big and exciting pillar of the Alliance model. Generally speaking, there's still quite a high rate of stigma around mental health and mental health concerns, and that comes down to a lack of education. So that's something that we're working with to get a better understanding of, as a community, where are we sitting in our education, and what do we need to help reduce this stigma and make people a little bit more aware of, what's going on in this space, what are the risk factors on the coast, and how they can be involved in preventing mental health and supporting people with mental health. And support for high-risk groups and their families is our last pillar. It's a tricky one because we need to be able to identify who our high-risk groups are, but also to be able to tailor the support services to the needs of those people. Therapy isn't just sitting in front of somebody telling them how you feel. So we need to be able to understand what supports are out there and get the people who need them in contact with those supports. So we're doing lots of things. I'm going to unpack those pillars a little bit for you now to give you a bit more of an idea of the kind of activities that we're running in there. Keeping in mind that we've only just launched this alliance and it is a growing program, which is an incredibly exciting thing. And it is something that's going to be responsive to the need of the coast. So if you're sitting there going, well, you haven't thought of doing this, we want to hear about that so we can try and figure out a way to do that and if it will be impactful. We're action focused and we're responsive, and that's how we want this alliance to be accepted and presented in the community. So public awareness is probably the first place to start with that. We currently have a survey out in the community asking people their opinions about how mental health is currently received and treated on the coast, because we can't even begin to start educating people unless we know what their current level of education is. When we understand those gaps in knowledge and where they are, we actually have an opportunity to then deliver different education and awareness activities and campaigns to the places that need them most. I personally want to see a bus with lots of fun facts on it and ways that people can get involved. There have been also talks of blimps, but I was told that I may or may not have been dreaming at the time. We want to be big, we want to be present. What we know about successful things is that they're very in your everyday life, and that's what the Alliance is going to be all about. The impact of stigma is a big one. So 4 in 5 people who experience a mental illness feel the effects of stigma. It's something that's still very real and very present in people's lives. So addressing that one's a really tricky one because you have to understand the culture that underlies that. As Australians, we're very full of concrete, if you will. So the toughen up mentality is a very tricky one to try and break. So even starting to understand that stigma around it's okay not to be okay, and how can we start to unpack that and make it a little bit more of a healthier approach to mental health. It's going to be a long process, it's going to be a hard process, but we have enough evidence behind this model that will demonstrate that it can be done. Gatekeeper training is, again, one of my favourites. Our aim is to train at least 1% of the Sunshine Coast population by June 2023. That's 3,000 people. We run it here every month, free of charge for the community. We're also going to start implementing it into the workplace as well, because it's really hard. We're very time poor people. Taking an extra 3 hours out of your day to come and learn about something that hopefully you'll never have to use, but you probably will. It's a big ask. So we're trying to think of strategies of how we can bring Gatekeeper training to the people. Our next Safe Talk workshop is on Monday, the 8th of April. I'll pause so you can write that date down. We encourage everybody from every walk of life to come along to one of these trainings. They're run by, we run the Safe Talks training because it's got the strongest evidence base. So again, everything we do here is underpinned by an evidence base. It's a 3-hour training session and it's run by one of my favourite facilitators in the world, Susan, who's actually hiding in the back there. And it teaches you very practical skills for identifying suicidality and what to say to somebody that you're worried about. The next step up from the Safe Talks training, is Assist, which is another package presented by the same company, and again has a really strong evidence base. But it's those practical skills around supporting somebody who's demonstrating depression, suicidality. Everybody can be a gatekeeper. We have trained everybody from personal trainers to taxi drivers to nanas and granddads to people doing their psych courses. Depending on, it doesn't matter where you are and what you're working in, there's a chance that you might come across somebody who's a little off colour. And one of my favourite examples is hairdressers. When you're thinking about little Doris who gets her hair done every week, that hairdresser is actually going to start to see a decline in Doris's mental health if she's experiencing some challenges. So giving those skills to that hairdresser to go, hey Doris, you're a little blue, are you doing okay? Empowering people to step up and actually have an active role is what we want to see gatekeeper training achieve.
Amanda,
Yes.
can I just add something to that point? I came to Safe Talk a couple of weeks ago, loved it, impressed the pants off me. I went to my hairdresser the next day, and little did I know that I would have to put that Safe Talk training and information that I learned into full-blown action with my hairdresser.
There you go.
Yeah.
Thank you for that feedback.
You're very welcome, because Susan, told her story about how she had to put her training into practice, and I just thought, wow, it couldn't have come at a better time, and yeah, I was really, really pleased to be able to help her in the way that she needed.
That is brilliant. Yeah. That's exactly what the whole gatekeeper training is about. When people have the skills to identify when something's not okay and the words to say when they are worried, you have people who can action that. And the outcome of that, again, is that ripple effect, but in a positive way. You help one person who can go on and help many others. Thank you for sharing that. GP training is a bit of a tricky one because we're talking about a very time-poor population. We have a very strong evidence-based training package that we're going to be running out later this year, which has a lot of different facets to it, but it talks to the medical mind. And the skills that GPs will take out of this are things like how to undertake a suicide risk assessment, how to develop a collaborative safety plan. So not just telling people who are struggling what to do, but asking them what they need and how they can support it. How to implement a team approach to treatment planning. So again, it's a complex issue. Many people have to be associated and involved in the treatment plans. So how do you build those collaborative plans that'll work? And effective management following a suicide attempt. The other side is a tricky side to be working on when people come out of the ER, when people come out of the other side of a suicide attempt. And doctors play a very big role in supporting people on that side. We know that people who have attempted are at a very high risk of attempting again or even dying by suicide down the line. So learning how that we can upskill and empower our GPs to have a more of an active role in supporting people so they don't try again is a really important skill to have. Also to how to respond to the people who've been bereaved by suicide. So that ripple effect is a big one, and how do we support people who have all of those unanswered questions and that feeling of loss. It's a very tricky space to work in, and GPs do, again, play an active role in that. So they need those skills. What is very promising is that GPs know that they need those skills. So they're actually starting to recognise that they have a role in mental health and they want to get that information. The tricky thing is when. Which is why we have chosen an accredited course. So they come along to our course and they get their CPD points. And that's something that usually their clinics can support, which is a good thing. Supporting our high-risk groups. The first step of that is how to identify and collaborate with these groups. So we've got our 40 to 60-year-old men on the coast who are our statistically high-risk groups. I am not a 40 to 60-year-old male. So walking into the men's shed and saying, I'm here to talk to you about mental health, probably won't land very well, which is why the Alliance isn't standing up and telling people how to do their jobs and reinventing the wheel. We're partnering with people who are already working in this space and giving them the skills and the resources to help these high-risk groups. All of a sudden, we have a collaborative approach to supporting these people who need the support. Clinical research is a big part of what we're doing here, and it's a big part of how we're going to support people at high risk. And understanding and strengthening referral pathways is one of the trickiest jobs I think we've got in our alliance model. As I said earlier, there are a lot of different referral pathways that exist on the coast, but we're talking about a vulnerable population. If you get on Google when you're struggling and you try and find somebody who can help you, it's paralysis by choice, and that's not okay. So we really need to work with these providers and figure out a way that we can strengthen and make these referral pathways as clean, clear, and easily accessible as possible. One of our programs that we're running here is Indigenous community consultations. There is an incredibly high rate of suicide in our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. It's not even a space that we can begin to understand unless we have consultations with our Kabi Kabi and Gabi Gabi people, because they know what works and doesn't work for their culture. We've run a few of these now. We're up to I think our third consultation, and they are a lot of fun because you actually get to ask direct questions and get direct answers. And what we're going to do with this information is actually revise the alliance model so it is culturally appropriate. The activities in each of the 4 pillars are going to be meaningful to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Our next consultation is on the 16th of April in Mapleton. We've partnered up with Tribal Link up there. We're going to be using yarning circle methodology, so instead of just sitting in a room talking about dry statistics and whatnot, we'll be out there on country talking to people, getting them to share their story, getting to unpack the needs and the goals and the things that are most meaningful to this population. If you'd like more information on that consultation, do feel free to contact Tegan. She's sitting up the back there as well if you want to have a chat to her over lunch. We do have a lot of current projects running, which I'm going to go through in not too much detail because I don't want to terrify too many people. The 3 big ones at the moment are our community survey, the workplace integrated suicide prevention, and the gatekeeper training program. So our survey was sent out at the end of last year, and the aim of this survey is to understand what people think is going on the coast. Are they accessing services? If not, why not? Who are they talking to? Are they talking to doctors? And what's the kind of trust and treatment around mental health at the moment? With this information, we can start to understand the gaps that are in that knowledge, like I was saying before. At the moment, we've got, I think it's nearly 1,000 responses. So we're starting to get an idea of this real voice of the coast. We're hoping that every time we do send out these kinds of surveys, more and more people will jump on board because we want to be seen as an action-focused alliance. From this survey, we're going to use this information and you'll see the direct effect of it as quickly as we can humanly accomplish. If you haven't done it, please do it. The survey closes on the 31st of March, so time is ticking and I encourage you to do it. That's the website there. Otherwise, there are some flyers out on the table at the front that you can take with you. Fill it out and share it all about. Get your networks to fill it out as well. Because we can't respond to the needs of the coast unless we have the voice of the coast. And there's no way that we can access them without help from other people in the community. So please do share, and thank you in advance. Our Workplace Integrated Suicide Prevention Program is a big strategy, but I think it's going to be a very effective strategy because it's relying on that ripple effect. We're in 8-hour communities every day, our 9 to 5 family, if you will. By taking suicide prevention to the workplace, encouraging people to get involved, there's no extra strain. You're removing a barrier of having to make time to come out, make time out of their day to come out and learn about suicide prevention. In fact, our work colleagues are probably some of the best placed people to notice a change in our mental health. And they're probably some of the first people that we'll talk to about it as well. I'm I'm not performing very well today, I'm a bit down, or oh, I'm just off colour, it's fine, sorry I missed that meeting. People start to notice, but we need to be able to give our staff the skills to be able to respond to that in an appropriate way. It's a tiered program in that we don't expect everybody in a workplace to jump on board with 2 feet. So the first stage in this is just a general awareness training. So just the general, these are the high risk kind of mental health concerns and what they look like and what you can do about them. So our big ones on the coast are depression, anxiety, stress and substance use. So we're going to be teaching people a bit about those, and what they look like, what to do about them, and the resources that can possibly help. Then we're going to ask people if they want to be upskilled a little bit further, if they want to take on some active suicide prevention training. And then we're going to roll out safe talks in the workplace. And again, at the end of that, if people still want more, they can take on assist. And we're hoping by the end of these programs, we have a tiered training. The foundation of a workplace has that general awareness of the risks to suicidality. A healthy majority have at least suicide prevention training. And perhaps it might only be your management that has the assist training, but they have the practical skills to be able to help their staff during work hours, after work hours, but to be able to be strategically placed to actually make a difference. We have some big players already wanting to roll this out in their workplace, places like UE Insurance, who employ 1,500 people. What we'll see with that is mum and dad might get trained at work and take those skills home. And all of a sudden they're teaching little Jimmy about, depression and what to look out for. And little Jimmy might take that to school and notice that his friend Bob isn't doing so well. And all of a sudden you've got that positive ripple effect of just educating one person and giving them a good experience around mental health training. They'll take that on and share it with their networks. Other big ones are like Jets gyms. So their goal is not only to train their staff, but also to be able to help out their clients. And they have a smattering of gyms all over Australia and internationally. So their reach is even further again. Smaller organisations are also coming on board to do this training. So we're not biased in the size of the organisation. What is important though is getting as many people as educated as we can possibly achieve. So our Gatekeeper training program is, we have to assess a lot of different things to understand the effectiveness of Gatekeeper training. So people might have an increase in knowledge after coming along to Safe Talks, but whether or not that knowledge translates into behaviour is another question. And to answer this, we actually have a PhD student working full-time on this particular issue. And he's going to be integrating things like resilience training and planned behaviour into his PhD, because we don't want to train people up and have them become part of the problem through compassion fatigue. Giving people the skills to ask about suicide is a big undertaking, so we also need to be making sure that they're resilient to the answers that might be coming back. We have an incredibly high rate of suicide in our helping professions, our ambulance, our police, our doctors. We don't want to have that flow-on effect in our community members who've been upskilled in this, which is one of the reasons that Glenn is looking at the impact of resilience training and how it can help support Gatekeeper training as well. The digital tool is an exciting one. So as I said, everything's online, but we don't want to just add another thing that paralyzes people when they're looking for help. In fact, a big goal of the digital tool is to help streamline services for the people who are needing them. So it might not be the same thing for absolutely everybody, but if you plug in who you are and where you are, it will be able to help you. We're hoping this tool will actually assist gatekeepers to support people that may be at risk of suicide. So if I'm standing at Stockland in Kawana and trying to support somebody who's in distress, I need to know who and what's around me, but I'm not from Kawana, so it might be hard for me to get this information. And so I don't have to disconnect from the person I'm supporting. We need a streamlined tool, and that's what our digital tool is going to achieve. We're developing this not through our own brain power, but we're using focus groups. Again, we're drawing on the expertise and the needs of the community to help us develop and build things. There's a focus group running on the 26th of March that we encourage as many people to get involved with as possible. So if it's something you're interested in, please have a chat to Elise down the back, or you can email suicideprevention@usc.edu.au. We're hoping we'll see this on the shelves by the end of the year. We have no intention of just rolling something out because we think it looks pretty. We will be evaluating it before it becomes mainstream, because we don't want to build just another thing that'll confuse people. We want to make sure that everything that comes out of this alliance is evidence-based, meaningful, and actually helpful, because we're talking about a vulnerable population. Our clinical trials is something that I'm only going to touch the surface of today. We have Dr. Adam Cairn, who works here at the Thompson Institute 1 day a week. He's a bulk billing psychiatrist, which I'm told is about as rare as hen's teeth. Adam comes up and helps us run our clinical trials. We've got one running now for the treatment of chronic suicidality. The definition of chronic suicidality is having those intense feelings of suicidality for a large duration that are resistant to other treatments. It's a 6-week active phase followed by a 4-week follow-up. It's not a blanket or a randomized control trial in that we give absolutely everybody the same treatment. It is a flexible treatment based on the needs of the patients. And that's one thing that Adam does absolutely phenomenally, is he listens to and responds to people as they're coming through the trial. So that 6-week phase does depend a lot on people's tolerances and their experiences. The 4-week follow-up phase is a really important one, because we need to know whether or not this clinical trial is going to have an immediate effect or a lasting effect. And I'm absolutely stoked to say that we're starting to see that this treatment is having a long-term effect. And what's more exciting is your typical antidepressant drugs take about 6 to 8 weeks to really take hold. Some of our patients have started to feel the positive effects of this clinical trial within about 20 minutes. And those results are lasting for weeks, if not months. And that's an absolutely stunning thing when you think about the high risk of people coming out of the emergency room being given a script for an antidepressant and you cross your fingers. But if they can actually start to feel the positive benefits of a drug treatment within the first 20 minutes, they're going to go home feeling a bit more hopeful. And that's what we really want to see come out of these trials. We're not just relying on people's subjective experience either. We're implementing a lot of neuroimaging within this to see what effect this clinical trial is having on people's brains. So we're implementing a couple of different magnetic resonance imaging methodologies. So looking at the structure of the brain and the function of the brain, but also the chemical regulation of the brain as well. We're also asking people to sit through an EEG as well, which measures the brain waves as people are subjected to different stimuli. This way we can actually show that these effects are having a neurobiological take, and it's not just people's subjective interpretation of the drug treatment. There's no way that we can do all of this by ourselves. We have an impressive team, but we can't cover all of the bases. This community-based model is dependent on community buy-in. It's dependent on people standing up, stepping up and saying, I want to be involved, I'll help. The partnerships and collaborations that we've already built have indicated that the Sunshine Coast is incredibly receptive to this model, but we do need more. We want all organisations to come on board and get involved with the Alliance, whether it be integrating the workplace suicide prevention or supporting their staff in coming to do safe talks, or just filling out surveys or having information on their tea room tables. Having people involved and advocating for the Alliance is how we'll reach the entire Sunshine Coast community. Sustainability is a big part of this program. Largely, we're trying to design ourselves out of a job. We want the Alliance to be a standalone thing that if in 2 years' time it's shown to be a massive success, the Institute can actually step to the side and let the community own this and continue to run it and continue to thrive with this model. We would also love to be around for the ride and continue to build in evaluations and make sure that we're always doing the best that we can in suicide prevention. But these three things together is how this alliance model works, which is why I'm so incredibly grateful for you all coming down here this morning and hearing a little bit more about the program. And hopefully you'll go forth today and tell at least one more person about the program. Encourage them to send us an email or jump on Facebook and learn a bit more. Send them on over, we'll have a chat to them as well. And we'll start to grow this network and build this support team so we can actually start to make some real impact in suicide prevention. There's heaps of different ways to get involved. So as I just mentioned, we have a Facebook page because everybody's on Facebook these days. Or good old email. Elise actually loves to live on her email account and loves to respond to people's questions. I'm getting great looks right now. As I said, we do encourage heaps of people to complete the survey. We need the voice. If you've had an idea halfway through today that you want to workshop with us, do flick us an email, and we love to hear people's ideas and how we can implement them into the model. Join the Alliance. Bring your organisation on board, bring yourself on board. It's free to join. It costs you no time. You get to put your badge on our badge wall, and we get to sing your praises, because a strong alliance is made up by a lot of different diverse groups. So we want as many on board as we possibly can. So we're sharing that message, so we're moving forward in the same direction together. Attend a training session. This one doesn't count. Come on down to one of the SAFE talks or get involved in the general awareness. There's going to be one every month, as I said earlier. But if you're finding that getting to a 9 to 12 training session isn't working for you, and you've got a whole group of friends who would love to do the training as well, have a chat to us. We want to be flexible, we want to be responsive. So we need to know what the need is to be able to do those things. Promote awareness on depression and suicide. Research has shown time and time again that talking about suicide doesn't create a risk of suicide. You can't put these thoughts in people's heads just by asking a question. Talking about depression, opening up the conversation around suicide is so important. Talking to our kids about mental health and mental illness is so important. Being an advocate for people who might be struggling right now is so important. So starting these conversations, being brave and stepping up is something that we encourage everybody to do. And we are the first people to acknowledge that it is not easy. It is not easy to tell people that you work in suicide prevention and watch them just panic a little bit and back up, or spill their deepest, darkest secrets out to you. It's a hard thing to talk about because we don't know how to talk about it yet. But I think together and with more education, it's something that we can start to do quite well. And it's something that we can talk about over the dinner table or say quite easily in the hallways. That openness is how we get some air around this subject, and we can actually start to unpack the unhealthy parts and implement some things to make people more mentally healthy and more mentally resilient. Please follow us on Facebook. It's where we post a lot of our information. We also have a monthly newsletter that goes out for people who are against the Facebook, which I totally understand, by the way. But Facebook is where we share a lot about our members and our Alliance partners as well. We like to do little profiles on who's who in the Alliance. We run fact or fiction every other week. So you can start to learn some stuff about the brain and how it relates to suicide and what we're doing about it. We try to keep it fun and fresh, basically. So we have covered a lot today. So if you've been traumatised by this information session, we do encourage you to phone somebody, get some support. I hope I haven't been too torturous for you. But quite seriously, guys, if you yourselves are worried about your mental health or you're worried about somebody else, using these helplines is a great place to start. A little known fact about Lifeline is actually you can phone them up if you're worried about somebody else, if you're supporting somebody else and you don't really know what to do. You can phone them up and they will give you professional advice on how to support somebody. These are just 3 of the helplines that are available. Obviously there's some more specialised ones. There's the men's helpline, which I've encouraged my dad to use so many times. He's used it once, and he said it wasn't that bad. There's also support services for kids helpline. There's the return servicemen's helplines as well. There's so many different helplines for different things because there's so many different needs of different people. So using these helplines, it's not a sign of weakness, it's actually a sign of strength. Being able to step up and go, hang on, I need some help. So encouraging other people to use the helplines is a great first step. I know we went over a lot of stuff quite quickly. That wasn't intended to confuse or baffle you. It's just there is a lot going on in our suicide prevention program, and the aim of this morning was actually to give you a peek behind the curtain so you can kind of get an idea of what we're doing. So if there are issues that you want to raise or ideas you want to workshop, you kind of know where we're heading towards and where those questions might be best directed.